Fourth speaker this evening is Michael Mulligan, barrister. And Michael too made the excursion over the Malahat to Little Nanaimo today. We thank you for coming out all the way, Michael. Michael has been practicing criminal law in Victoria for 26 years. And get this, he also does a weekly radio show on CFAX in Victoria called Legally Speaking. He has been involved with issues relating to the Law Society for many years. Tonight, Michael will speak on the effect Bill 21, if passed, would have on legal profession and what this would do to our communities. You realize if the government can do it to healthcare practitioners and lawyers, who will be next? Can we put our hands together to welcome Michael to the platform?
Thank you very much. I must say, when I came here tonight, one of the interesting things being a criminal lawyer who does from time to time spend time in other communities up and down the island, is you wind up with sort of a unique and not always happy impression of communities you're in. Because usually when I'm showing up, it's not about some happy event, it's about some terrible event. And I must say, I was sitting here tonight thinking, well, this is a nice replacement memory for Nanaimo. I'll think about this lovely place, a beautiful evening. But I must say, I'm going to go away from this with some different thoughts than I think I came in with, having heard from Lana about what the state of affairs here is in hospitals and for nurses. And that sure sounds a whole lot more like the sort of issues that I'm dealing with professionally than I thought I would hear about. So thank you so much for telling us about all of that. I got my work cut out for me here, trying to keep you all engaged about why Bill 21 should matter to you, particularly when I'm competing with a playoff game. So, to give some context, I think I need to tell you a little bit about how the legal profession works and what change this bill would have, and then some explanation for why the government might be pursuing it. And so the first thing to know about the legal profession is the legal profession is independent of government. And it's important that it is. It's important that it's independent from government so that if you are accused of doing something wrong, if you're accused of doing something wrong as a doctor, if your house is being searched, if something's being seized, you're charged with an offense, your children are being taken away, whatever it might be, you're able to hire somebody like me who is not beholden to the government. And that is true at the moment. The Law Society is independent of the government. It genuinely is. The benchers, which are like the board of directors for the Law Society, are elected, the overwhelming number of them are elected by lawyers themselves. And the reason it is set up that way is not to be some benefit for lawyers. It's similar to why we have independence for judges. That is not a benefit for the judge. We don't have judges appointed in a way that they can't be removed if you don't like their decisions to somehow benefit the judge. We do that so that when you wind up in front of a judge and they're making some decision, particularly when the other side of it is the government, which is not at all uncommon, it's every day I'm in court, the other side of it's the government. You want to have an independent judiciary so that the person who's making the decision about your life isn't answering to the other party that's trying to do something to you. That's why we have it. But an independent judiciary isn't a whole lot of good without an independent legal profession, because judges don't roam through town looking for injustices and trying to fix them. And so it is critically important to you, if you want to live in a society which is free and independent, and you want to have some person you can call when there's some apparent injustice being done to you, and it's sort of, I think, perhaps suitable that I'm here at the end of the list of potentially problematic bills speaking about Bill 21, because when some of those things might happen to you, you want to be able to call somebody who's not beholden to or worried about the government looking over their shoulder. That's why it's so important that we have an independent legal profession, and we have that. And so at the moment, if you look at the Legal Profession Act, it's the one that gives sort of the guidelines for how the Law Society operates. Its number one objective is this: to uphold and protect the legal rights and freedoms of all persons. Pretty tough to argue with that, right? This Bill 21, if it passes, it hasn't passed yet, is going to change what the objects would be of the entity that would regulate lawyers, okay? So, first of all, the government would have much more control over who's appointed to be on the board to make the rules. That is a concern because that reduces the independence of the legal profession. But it's more than what might theoretically happen as a result of the government having additional control and being able to appoint more people. Right in the legislation, right now, they would remove what I've told you the objective of the Law Society is now, rights and freedoms of all persons in British Columbia, and they have replaced it with a list of things which are largely political priorities of the current government. Now, they include things like, the second thing on the list is that the Law Society would be charged with doing things to implement the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. Okay, that's number 2 on the list. Now, some people might think that's a good idea. Some people might think that's a bad idea, right? It's not appropriate, whatever you think of that goal, that the regulator of the legal profession has a political goal as one of its key objectives. That's just not appropriate. And even if you're somebody who thinks, well, that's just a universal great thing, who could be against the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, even if you think that's great, you might not like the political priority of the next government. And the point of the matter is, think about this. Like, we've had a discussion now about, things like the effect of treaties or the effect of legislation. You've heard there's controversy about the agreement in Haida Gwaii, or there was controversy over the proposed Land Act that was backed off on. Now, let's just imagine that you're the person who's taking some issue with whether, for example, your property should be expropriated. You want to hire a lawyer to help you so you can go to court. Do you want a circumstance where the regulator of the person you're hiring has as one of its priorities to implement the piece of legislation that you're taking issue with? Just think about that. It's an outrageous state of affairs. It is very, very important. Now, this is hard to compete with a hockey game, and most people don't think they're going to ever wind up in that position. They just don't, right? Most people never think they're going to call me, right? Most people don't think their office is going to get searched. Or most people don't think they're going to get charged with some offense. But let me tell you, it happens. I'm busy, right? And when it happens, you need to know that the person who's helping you is there to help you. And they're not looking over their shoulder at what on earth is going to happen to me if I'm taking issue with this when I've got a bunch of regulators appointed by the government who have as their mandate to achieve various political goals of the government, whatever the government of the day might be. So again, don't look at it from the point of view of, do you like what they've got in the list now? You should ask yourself, should there be a list? That's really what's at stake. And what's going on here? Why are they doing this, right? I think there are 2 reasonable explanations for it. One is a general desire for control or to achieve political objectives that no doubt they genuinely think, well, these are universal. Who could disagree with my list of 5 things? So that's no doubt part of it. But there's other elements to it as well. One is naturally it's uncomfortable to have a group of independent people who might be regularly criticizing you, suing you. No one wants that. And under the model we have now, that happens. It's not just theoretical. And an example of that, and it's one of the other explanations that the government provides for this piece of legislation, Bill 21, is they say, well, this will make legal services cheaper. That's one of their explanations, right? Now, there's some history to that I've had some involvement with, so I'm going to give you the history so you know about it when you're hearing about that kind of justification. Another thing you should know, if you're going to hire a lawyer in British Columbia, unlike any other province in the country, we're the only province where when you hire a lawyer, you pay a special extra tax. It's a provincial sales tax that applies to no other professional service. You do not pay it if you hire an architect, an engineer, you don't hire for paying for a dentist, nothing else, just lawyers. It was introduced in 1992 by the then NDP government. Mo Sahota introduced the legislation, if you remember him. And when he introduced it, he said, this tax on lawyers' bills, and make no mistake, the lawyer doesn't pay it, the client does, right? This is to fund legal aid in the province for poor people that can't afford a lawyer, okay? What happened after about 5 years is the tax wound up collecting more money than the province would give to the Legal Aid Society, okay? At that time, the then opposition, it was a Liberal opposition at the time, there's a fellow named Jeff Plant, he was the critic. And he got all over the government. He said, this is wrong, right? You're taking money from the poor. This was supposed to pay for legal aid. This is an outrage. Well, what happened? The government changed. And then 2021, 2001, 2002, they cut legal aid funding roughly in half. They closed all the legal aid offices in the province. They virtually eliminated family legal aid. All poverty legal aid went. And they kept the tax. Okay? Of course they kept the tax. Who doesn't want to keep the tax? You got it in place, right? One of the things that I was involved with was organizing a Law Society resolution to censure the Attorney General. It was a vote of non-confidence in the performance of the Attorney General for failing to meet his core mandate, which would be dealing with ensuring justice is done in the province of British Columbia. It passed overwhelmingly. Now, do you think that would happen under this scheme? Well, whatever you think might happen, one of the other things they've done is, if this bill passes, removed all of the sections that allow members to call meetings like that, to have that kind of pushback and response. That'll be gone. So think about that background when you hear the argument, this is to help with access to justice. What they're really talking about there is, rather than properly funding legal aid, and that tax, by the way, now collects, they skim off more than half of the money that it collects every year. Half, more than half. It goes into general revenue, not provide to legal aid. That's why if you're a person on welfare, you're a single person on welfare, you're too wealthy to get legal aid coverage. Most people don't find that out until they wind up in trouble, okay? So what their plan would be under this thing would be to create a bunch of paralegals who they could have doing legal work for the poor. Rather than putting the money where it's supposed to be, that's what the poor will get in British Columbia. So that's why, despite there being a hockey game on, and a playoff one at that, that's what you should be aware of when you hear about this legislation. It impacts on all of this other stuff, right? If you take issue with these things, you want somebody to contest that when you're the person in trouble, just think about what the implications of this are. It's dreadful. Bill 21. Remember the number. Thank you.
That sure got the juices stirring.